Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. I jerked the trash bag closed and it sliced my thumb. Porcelain shifted inside like teeth ready to bite. The dumpster groaned when I heaved the weight up. I'm Owen Hale, 31, and I was done hiding. A glass hand slid out and hung there, waiting. I ripped it free and shoved it deeper fast. My phone flashed Mia's location and a shrinking distance. 9 minutes, maybe less if lights favored her route. Another bag waited by the door like a dare. I grabbed it and pictured the lock turning early. The hallway music box started on its own again. The tune crawled through the vents and shook my ribs. I followed the sound and kicked open the workshop. Dolls stared from cracked benches with stitched patience. I pulled the cord and the music bled out. I went for the biggest crate first, no pause. Its lid stuck and my bandaged thumb throbbed. I levered it with a screwdriver and felt give. A head rolled toward my shoe with painted lips stitched. I looked away and lifted fast because fear wastes time. A neighbor's door clicked and I froze mid-toss. I waited, breath short, ears wide for footsteps. Only the wind answered, thin and careless over grit. I dumped the crate anyway and swallowed the flinch. Something inside clattered like a hidden battery coming loose. My phone buzzed with an incoming call icon. Mia's name throbbed on the screen like a warning. I let it ring because words would slow me down. I hit do not disturb and silenced the guilt. Then I slid the final bolt on the side gate. Back in the kitchen, I tied another bag tight. The knot slipped and porcelain pressed against my palm. I wrapped the bag with tape and double-tied. My thumb dripped across tile and mapped my rush. I wiped once and left the smear for later. A small doll slumped on the chair with threadbare hair. It looked ordinary until the neck clicked and opened. Inside lay a folded slip with a drawn X. I didn't understand and I didn't want to. I stuffed it in my pocket and kept moving. The hallway smelled like mold that stung the eyes. That mattered because spores meant a real health risk. I grabbed the heaviest bags first and saved seconds. Every trip took strength I hadn't used in years. The timer in my head said 7 minutes left. I kicked a loose arm under the fridge by instinct. It tapped metal twice and settled in the dark. I reached with tongs and pinched it by the wrist. The hand held a ring that wasn't plastic at all. I blinked and shoved both into the bag anyway. A thud upstairs froze my spine in place. Weight shifted across the ceiling like a cautious step. The house settled or the house watched, I couldn't tell. I didn't check because doubt adds minutes I lacked. I took 2 bags at once and nearly dropped them. On the porch, a stray cat bolted under the grill. I kicked the lid and the clang echoed far. Next door, a curtain moved like an eye annoyed. I kept my head down and shoved bags to curb. The truck's schedule haunted me like a countdown. Back inside, the work lamp flickered with a faint buzz. I unplugged it because I needed no surprises. One shelf leaned and threatened to spill another crowd. I braced it with a chair and grabbed the top row. Painted pupils tilted until they faced the door. My phone showed Mia turning onto our street now. I felt heat in my chest like a struck match. I went for speed over care and paid for it. A doll head cracked the floor and split wide. Something soft fell out and rolled under the baseboard. I dropped to my knees and reached into dust. My fingers closed around a felt pouch with weight. I almost looked and then I stopped myself hard. Seeing more would slow me more, and I knew it. I pocketed the pouch and shut the light off. Keys rattled in the bowl as I grabbed the last bag. The front lock shivered once and then held firm. I stared at the chain and felt my pulse climbing. I opened the side door to cut the distance. A tire hissed against the curb like a warning. I jogged the bags to the dumpster with aching arms. The lid fought me and then slammed with a bang. I flinched and checked the window out of habit. Her shadow crossed the glass like a tide coming. I wiped my hands and chose to lie. The lock clicked once, then the door swung hard into my shoulder. Bags toppled and one rolled toward her shoes. She closed the door with the edge of her hip. Her eyes went to the curb, then to my hands. "Move," she said, already pushing past me toward the hallway. I stepped in front of the workshop and braced the frame. "The city pickup is early today," I heard myself say. She watched my mouth, not my face, and waited. "We'll sort it later," I added and reached for a bag. Her palm landed on the plastic and stayed there firm. "What's in the pocket?" she asked, chin lifting slightly. I shifted my leg and felt the pouch against my thigh. Gloves, I tried, and heat climbed my neck fast. She didn't blink, then reached for the nearest knot. I caught her wrist and felt it shake with rage. "Let go," she peeled my fingers off one by one. The knot slipped and the contents knocked the tile. A ceramic cheek spun and tapped her heel twice. She crouched and set it upright like a living thing. "Where are the rest?" she asked, steady but deadly. At the curb, the lie snapped before it left. She turned to the window, then to the side gate. I knew she heard the empty street and the quiet. Her jaw tightened as she stepped into the workshop. I followed because I couldn't let her see everything. She scanned the benches slowly, then stopped at the chair. Her fingers traced the notch where a head used to rest. "Who told you to touch this room?" she asked without volume. I swallowed and moved my body in front of the crates. Something inside settled with a dull knock like a warning. She reached past me and pulled the lamp cord with a snap. "Don't," I said, and I lifted a bag to block her view. The lamp stayed dark because I'd yanked the plug earlier. She noticed the missing cord and looked at my hands. Blood crossed my knuckle and gave me away. "Bathroom," she pointed without looking away from me. "I'm fine," I wiped the cut on my jeans and winced. "Bathroom," she repeated, and her stance didn't budge. I went down the hall because refusal would explode now. I closed the door and felt the pouch burn in my pocket. I stared at the mirror and heard zippers outside the door. Plastic scraped and then the scrape stopped abruptly. I turned the tap for noise and bought 2 breaths. I tucked the felt into the back of the drawer. I flushed the toilet to sell the act harder. When I opened the door, she stood with 2 items. A cracked head in one hand and a lopsided torso. She held them out like evidence that demands a verdict. Her mouth didn't move, but her arms did. The pieces touched and clicked, and her eyes widened. She stepped around me and headed for the side yard. I followed with a bag because momentum felt safer. "You loaded the bin," she noted, eyes on the lid. "It's full of junk from the shed," I answered quickly. She planted both feet and waited for my next mistake. She lifted the lid and froze at the top layer. I felt the ground tilt because this was the point. She pulled out a braided strand and shook her head once. The braid shivered and shed dust across her sleeve. Her breath hitched and then flattened into something colder. "Truck comes on Friday," her voice was low and even. "It's Thursday," I said, and heard how weak it sounded. "They can do surprise runs," she countered, still staring down. I looked toward the corner where our cans should sit. Only the empty space answered, wide like a trap. "Call them," she tossed me the phone from her pocket. I fumbled the unlock, then watched the signal spin. No service glitched for a second, then returned. "Name, address, special pickup," she said, giving me each step. I started the call and felt sweat gather under my shirt. A recorded menu asked for choices that didn't fit us. I pressed numbers and begged for a live voice fast. Hold music trickled through and ate my patience. She stared at the bin like it could still swallow us. I thought about hanging up and lying again. A human answered, and I asked about an unscheduled haul. They checked the route and confirmed no trucks near us. I thanked them and ended the call with a shaky breath. She listened to that breath and read the truth instantly. "Then where did you take them?" she asked and waited. My gaze drifted to the far gate without meaning to. Her eyes followed mine and lit with furious certainty. She didn't run, she walked, which was worse. I grabbed her elbow and felt the tremor return. "Stop at the corner," I said, and she pulled free. We turned onto the alley where the big container sat. The lid hung open like a mouth that never closes. She climbed the side and looked in without a word. I held the ladder and hated myself in a new way. Her shoulders dropped once, then squared like a decision. "Help me get them out," she said with no discussion. "I can't get inside without someone holding this ladder." I looked at the sky and counted 3 slow breaths. Then I climbed up beside her and swung down carefully. My shoes hit metal and the hollow boom shivered up. She leaned over and handed me the nearest broken thing. I stacked pieces in a corner and kept my eyes forward. Every lift brought another small clue taped under fabric. I didn't ask about any of it because I knew better. She did not offer anything because I hadn't earned it. We worked fast until a distant engine rose from the street. She glanced toward the sound and tightened her grip on the rim. "We're not finished," she said, and we both knew that. I shoved another armful toward the ladder with shaking calves. The engine grew louder and the lid started to rattle. The truck nose slid into the alley before we finished stacking. There. Brakes hissed and the container shuddered under my feet. She glanced up once, then threw me another fractured piece. Faster, her jaw clenched hard enough to threaten a crack. Metal ground above us as a hook rattled into place. I shoved fragments toward the ladder and climbed 2 rungs. She caught them at the rim and leaned dangerously far. Another jolt hit and the lid slammed halfway down. I wedged my shoulder under it and pushed up. The engine roared again and drowned my breath. "Hold it there," her forearms trembled but didn't slip. I slid down, grabbed a bent panel and braced. The lid lifted an inch, then another stubborn inch. A worker rounded the corner and stared like we were thieves. "Clean up," I called, trying to sound official enough to pass. He squinted, then grabbed the lid and steadied the swing. "Make it quick," his boots creaked as he shifted weight. She reached in deep and pulled a torso with stitches. Something rattled inside it like a trapped trinket begging out. She pressed it to her chest and looked straight at me. "There's more," her voice dropped low and urgent. I slid across the slick floor and checked the far corner. Under a grate I spotted a braid pinned with wire. I pried it free and felt resistance like a hooked fish. The braid tore loose and left a slice on my palm. The worker grimaced and passed me a rag without questions. He pointed at the grate and tapped twice in warning. "Sharp edges," he tilted his chin toward the winch cable. "Ignore that and you'll lose more than skin today." I nodded and shoved the braid into the growing stack. The hook clanged against the frame and the container lurched. We staggered and pressed our bodies to the ribbed wall. She didn't flinch, she had both eyes on a single head. It lay wedged between cans and a cracked lid. She reached for it and scraped her wrist on the seam. Careful, I moved closer and lifted the edge with boots. She slid her fingers under and freed the head gently. Her mouth tightened as she studied painted lashes and a scuff. "Ladder," she breathed, already turning toward the worker's grip. He hauled her up while I gathered whatever still held shape. Alley gravel rattled under new tires approaching behind the truck. Another city vehicle idled and wait time vanished fast. The worker shot us a look that meant choose now. I scooped a final armload and balanced on the rung. She steadied my back and pulled me over the rim. We set the salvage on the ground in a hasty line. The worker lowered the lid, then checked the alley again. 5 minutes, he tugged his sleeve and stepped aside. She knelt, pressed the torso seam, and listened with focus. A soft shift inside answered like a promise still alive. She slid a screwdriver into the stitching and teased it open. I held light from my phone and kept my hand steady. Inside, a felt pocket appeared with an outline that glinted. She looked at me once and my throat tightened on instinct. She tipped the pouch and a thin ring rolled into her palm. Not costume metal, real weight, heavy with meaning I dodged. She breathed in, small and controlled, then tucked it safe. "Where did you find that braid?" she asked without lifting her gaze. "Under the grate," I answered and felt the cut throb again. She wrapped her wrist with cloth and kept working in silence. A dispatcher's voice crackled from the truck cab impatiently. The worker jerked his chin toward our last scattered pieces. "We're clearing this alley now," he warned without malice. She stood, eyes fixed on the head with the scuff. "Help me match this," she muttered, already testing the fit. I aligned the neck pin and heard a clean click. Her shoulders eased a fraction, then tensed again at once. She pressed the ring against the hairline and searched grooves. "Something else belongs here," she murmured, fingers tracing hidden slots. I felt the braid in my jacket and realized the shape. "Try this," I offered the braid with both hands steady. She slid it through the pinhole and it locked perfectly. For a heartbeat, we just listened to the quiet settle. Then the worker coughed and pointed at the lifting arm. Decision time slammed us both in the chest like a hammer. "We take these now," she said, lifting the head carefully. I gathered the rest and nodded because the choice was clear. We loaded everything into the wagon in one quick pass. She stepped toward the worker and folded the rag back. "Thank you," she met his eyes and held them. He flicked a glance at the ring, then at our hands. "Keep that out of here next time," he said, almost kind. I felt heat crawl up my neck and didn't argue. We turned toward the gate and rolled the wagon fast. Behind us, the hook slammed down and erased any second chance. On the driveway, she stopped and blocked my path with her arm. "Where is the rest?" came quiet but absolute as a verdict. My mouth opened, then closed because truth scraped going. "Gee out." "In the house, I chose that piece and left the rest caged." Her stare said we both knew there was more waiting to explode. We crossed the threshold and she scanned the hall like a cop. I moved ahead and felt the weight in the bathroom drawer. My chest tightened because the next step would cost blood. She followed the look I tried to hide and reached for the handle. The drawer slid open and the felt pouch stared up like a dare. She lifted the drawer, fingers steady, and pinched the bundle. I reached too slow because my gut already knew. Her eyes cut to mine once, cold and exact. She loosened the tie and tipped the contents out. A thin ring chimed on porcelain and held the room. "Why here?" Bare words, no cushion. I looked at the sink to dodge the aim. Noise in the alley, I tried and hated the tremor. Her hand closed around the ring until knuckles blanched. "Why here?" she repeated sharper, and I ran out of dodge. I panicked, it landed between us like a dropped wrench. Her shoulders rose, then leveled because honesty came late. She slid the ring back into the pouch without blinking. "Bring the head," she said, already moving for the hall. Her pace told me we had seconds before something broke. We reached the table with our salvage lined rough. She placed the pouch beside the scuffed face carefully. "Hold the neck," she murmured, eyes on the seam. I anchored the joint while she fed the braid through. The piece clicked home and everything around us tightened. A hollow rattle inside the torso answered her touch. She tapped twice along the stitch, hunting for a pocket. Their fabric sagged and a tiny flap lifted. She slid the ring inside and pressed until a latch caught. The music box in the hall stuttered and then stopped. She looked at the motionless door and then at me. "You turned that off earlier," she said without question. "Yes," the word came thin but clean this time. I needed silence to move fast, I added, bracing. Her jaw flexed once, then released like a measured nod. Footsteps scraped outside on our gravel walkway. We both tensed without planning anything aloud. A neighbor silhouette paused at the fence and lingered. I killed the kitchen light with my elbow and waited. The steps faded unresolved and fear stayed anyway. She returned to the table and opened another seam. From deep inside, she drew a folded square of paper. Not old, not fragile, just deliberate and plain. She placed it between us and tapped once for courage. "Read it," she said, knuckles planted on the table edge. I unfolded it and saw a single drawn mark. An X centered with a short line beneath. My mouth dried because I'd seen that mark earlier. On a slip from a doll neck that clicked open. I dug my pocket and produced the crumpled twin. Her gaze snapped to the match and then to me. "You kept it," she breathed, surprise finally breaking through. I didn't know what it meant, I admitted, heart rapid. She aligned both slips and studied the edges carefully. They formed an arrow when fitted side by side. "Check the base," she said, tapping the torso seam. I flipped it, then stopped because markings etched there. Not decorative, coordinates cleanly scratched under the paint. She saw my face and took my wrist in a clamp. "We are not done with this," she warned and tightened. A tap sounded from down the hall like something settling. We turned together, instinct synced now by necessity. I grabbed the nearest box and wedged the door wide. She set the reassembled head on a towel near center. We listened until the house offered nothing but pressure. "Call the buyer list," she said, voice low and focused. I unlocked my phone and pulled up messages fast. Names flashed with unanswered texts and quiet demands. She watched my thumb hover over the top contact. "Not him," she cut in and shook her head once. "Why not?" I knew better than to argue long. "He pushed cash last week and he knew our schedule." The words hit with weight because our cans had vanished. I scrolled down to a different number and hit dial. They picked up on the second ring, breath clipped and curious. "Pickup went wrong," I said, keeping details tight. "Any unmarked vans near our block today?" A pause held, then a quick affirmative answer landed. "North Alley, 2 men, short visit, no trash pulled." I thanked them and ended before questions turned nosy. She touched the coordinates again with a thumb press. "Someone was searching these bodies for compartments," she said. I saw new scratches across the seam that weren't ours. Whoever came looked fast and didn't care about damage. My stomach flipped because I had opened the door for them. "Which ones left the house?" she asked without looking up. I swallowed and started counting in my head like a coward. She waited silent until I gave the actual number. Her eyes closed once, then opened with something settled. "Then we go get them now," she said and pushed away. From where, I already knew the answer would cost me. "Pawn lots first," she replied, tying her hair tight. "Then the recycler that pays under the table." I reached for my jacket and the keys on impulse. She blocked my hand and held it there deliberately. "You will not talk for me," she said with steel. "You will carry, you will pay, you will listen." I nodded because there was nothing else that fit. She slipped the ring pouch into her pocket, quick and calm. The music box ticked once in the silence like a threat. We loaded the wagon again and secured the top layer. She checked the latch twice and still wasn't satisfied. I stepped back to give her room and avoid more sparks. She glanced at me and then at the front door. "Lock behind us," she added, as if we might return chaste. On the threshold, she paused and glanced at the table. Her hand rose, hovered over the repaired head, then withdrew. "Don't leave this uncovered," she ordered, voice almost gentle. I threw a towel over it and tucked the corners tight. Something thumped in the wall and both of us flinched. We stepped into the night with a plan that felt thin. The alley breathed and watched like it had a memory. I pushed the wagon and heard my mistake in every squeak. She walked ahead with her shoulders squared like armor. The coordinates in my pocket pressed against my leg like heat. We hit the first shop before the wagon stopped rattling. She walked straight to the counter and set down the head. "Back room," she said, eyes on the clerk's twitch. He stalled, then reached under the till for a bell. I moved my hand to my pocket and felt the coordinates burn. A door swung and a manager filled the gap with bulk. He glanced at the braid, then at our faces. No trades after hours, he reached for the piece anyway. She pulled it back and let silence do the work. "Show inventory from today," I added, voice low enough to carry threat. He hesitated, then tapped a tablet with 2 quick swipes. 3 thumbnails flashed with familiar seams and scuffs. My stomach tightened because those were ours without question. "Cash on the spot," I said, already counting folded bills. She lifted her chin once, and the amount doubled without a word. We took 2 bodies and a lid with fresh scratches. She ran a fingertip along a razor nick and frowned. "Someone opened this without knowing how," she murmured, all steel. The manager watched the door like he expected company soon. We left fast because the air felt charged with trouble. At the recycler, the gate arm hung down like a bar. A skinny guard checked our wagon and chewed slow. "Closed," he muttered, eyes on the braid at the joint. "Not for 20 minutes," she replied, producing the receipt stack. He weighed the odds and lifted the arm with a grunt. Inside the yard, a loader idled with a bored driver. She strode to the scale and planted the head on metal. "We're not weighing," I said, placing the pouch on top. The driver cut the engine and raised both hands. "No fights in my lane," he warned, board turned alert. The yard boss arrived with a clipboard and a blank look. He studied the seam and the neat braid insertion. "Never saw that here," he lied, blinking too much. She slid $1 across and tapped the stitched notch. "Open it," she said, and held eye contact like a vice. He tried a blade and pried at the wrong edge. The seam refused until she angled his hand precisely. The flap popped and revealed a metal token with ridges. Numbers were carved along one side in clean rows. I read them once and felt my pulse kick. The boss reached for it and she intercepted midair. "You never saw us," she told him, pocketing the disc. "Tell your loader to forget our wagon too." He nodded quickly and found a stack of papers to shuffle. The guard watched from the gate like a dog smelling thunder. We turned to leave and a van rolled past the yard. Unmarked, slow, windows black enough to throw a mirror. It drifted, then steadied like the driver counted. "Heads." She squeezed my forearm hard enough to leave half moons. "Third stop," she said, and we changed direction without debate. At a thrift warehouse, we found our missing arm on a shelf. The cashier claimed ignorance with a pleasant smile that cracked. She placed a small bill on the counter and held it. "Where did this come from?" she asked, voice gentle as a rope. The cashier flicked eyes toward a side door and coughed. We followed the glance and stepped into a cluttered hallway. 2 workers blocked the end with cautious posture and crossed arms. I lifted the torso and showed the opened pocket. "Wrong buyer," I told them, and let the braid show. Their stance softened a notch because they understood trade codes. "Back lot," one muttered, scratching at his wrist nervously. We reached a crate beside a cracked pallet and popped it. Inside lay 3 heads and a bundle wrapped in tape. She peeled the tape in quick strokes and found a tiny board. A dead tracker sat there with the battery ripped out. "That van again," I breathed, and the hairs rose. She nodded once and slid the tracker into my palm. "Keep it dead," she ordered, pulling the token from her pocket. She compared the ridges to the carved numbers like a locksmith. "Unit code," she whispered, and the plan shifted under my feet. "What unit?" My voice came out thinner than I wanted. She pointed to the token and tapped the last digits. "Storage down by the river," she answered, already moving. A horn blared out on the road and cut the moment. We shoved the crate onto the wagon and ran for the alley. The van reappeared at the corner and paused with a hum. She grabbed my sleeve and dragged me behind the dumpster. I watched the side door slide an inch, then stop. Someone inside set something down and clicked a latch closed. The van crawled forward, slow as a test we might fail. We kept to shadow and pushed the wagon over loose gravel. Every squeak felt like a flare pointing at our backs. She breathed in steady counts, and I matched the rhythm. At the main street, we cut left toward the on-ramp. "Wrong way," I hissed, and she shook her head once. "Home first," she said, jaw locked like a clamp. They know what they want, and it isn't random. The token pressed against her pocket like a loaded decision. I felt the pouch's outline and swallowed the old instinct. No more shortcuts, just follow her lead or lose everything. We reached our block and stopped halfway down the walk. The front door stood still, but the frame showed fresh scars. Two thin lines scored the wood near the latch like teeth. She raised a finger to her lips and listened hard. Inside, the music box ticked a single beat and held. I eased the wagon behind the hedge and crouched low. She slid the spare key from under the step with calm hands. "Count to 10, she whispered and slipped toward the side yard. I watched the nearest window for movement and saw none. At 6, the hallway tune drifted faint and then cut. She reappeared and raised 2 fingers to signal clear. We crossed the threshold and moved as one toward the table. The towel lay folded wrong by a stranger's touch. She lifted the edge and checked the head with the braid. The ring pouch was gone, and the scrape in my chest went deep. "Back path," she didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. We ran to the gate and scanned the alley in sweeps. A figure turned the corner with careful steps and a bag. They looked over a shoulder and quickened without breaking stride. The van's engine answered from the far end like a promise. She locked eyes with me and made a hard choice fast. "Forget the wagon," she said, already sprinting into the lane. I dropped the handle and chased with everything I had. The figure heard us and bolted toward the idling van. Their bag swung once, and I recognized the shape by weight. I lunged for the strap and missed as the runner veered. The bag clipped a fence post and burst at the seam. A dull clink hit the pavement and spun under a car. She dove first and slid on her knees toward the sound. I cut off the runner and took the shoulder hard. The van door slid wider and a hand waved us back. I planted and shoved the runner into the panel with force. They folded and hit the curb with a bark of air. She rolled out holding the pouch tight against her chest. The van lurched, then paused when I raised the token high. "Trade for her," I called, teeth clenched against the shake. The van idled and the driver measured the street in swipes. He wanted what I held more than a quick exit. She stood, wiped grit from her arm, and nodded once. I tossed the metal chip to the middle of the lane. The driver cursed and jumped down to snatch it fast. She grabbed the runner's bag and ripped the zipper open. Inside lay a small key fob taped to a card. She slapped it into my palm and jerked her chin right. "Go," she snapped, already dragging the runner to the hedge. I bolted for the corner and cut through 2 yards. The van tires shrieked and then roared in the wrong direction. I reached the back lot where the storage gate waited. The fob vibrated once when I pressed it to the reader. Green flashed and the lock popped like a fishhook letting go. She appeared at my side with breath tight and controlled. I didn't ask what she did with the runner's nerve. We slipped inside and the roll-ups lined both walls. Numbers marched by until the token digits matched a door. She lifted her chin and I grasped the handle hard. The door rattled but refused until I lined and lifted. Then it gave and the unit breathed stale air and threats. A single trunk sat back on a pallet with new scratches. She pointed at the fresh pry marks and kept her distance. I stepped forward because this part was my mess to clean. I checked for wires with 2 slow passes of my hands. Nothing obvious, only shoddy haste and a ripped hinge. I worked the hasp with the flat of the fob's edge. The lid eased up and a nested box waited inside. She handed me the braid and I understood the key. I threaded the braid through the slot and twisted until it caught. A hidden latch slid and the inner lid cracked open. Papers filled the tray and a small drive rode shotgun. She plucked the drive and studied the label with a frown. Inventory, she breathed, eyes sharp as cut glass. She scanned the pages and traced entries with one finger. Each line listed a restored piece with a coded compartment. Deposit totals, transfer dates, and a charity contact at the end. Someone wanted the map, not the faces, not the work. My gut flipped because I had made their path smooth. Boots thumped at the far end of the corridor. The van crew had friends and time had run thin. She stacked the papers back and pushed the tray shut. "Take the trunk," she ordered, steady as steel cable. I tipped the pallet and wheeled the weight toward daylight. Two men rounded the corner and froze when they saw us. One raised a crowbar and the other stepped wide to flank. She didn't blink, she lifted the head with the finished braid. "Break this and the map ends forever," she warned flat. They stalled because some things carry their own gravity. I charged first and rammed the trunk into the closer one. He toppled and the bar clanged across concrete and spun. She took the opening and leveled the other with a shove. The head stayed tight against her ribs with both arms. We blasted through the gate as the alarm finally screamed. We didn't run home, we detoured toward the precinct. I hated that plan until I saw her jaw set. Inside, a desk sergeant watched our mess and raised an eyebrow. She placed the drive and the list on the counter. "Stolen goods," she said, voice calm enough to hold fire. Questions rained and we answered what mattered, nothing else. The report clock started and a detective took the folder. They wanted the trunk, we wanted copies with stamped seals. We got our copies after a long stare and a nod. Outside, she leaned against the wall and finally shook. "I was wrong to clean it alone," I said quiet. "I was worse to hide pieces when I panicked." She watched a patrol car slide past and didn't answer. Then she slipped the pouch over my fingers without ceremony. "Carry it," she said, "and don't vanish when it gets loud." We went home by back streets and cut alleys in zigzags. At our door we paused and listened to the stillness again. No ticking, no scrape, no watchful breath behind the walls. She lifted the towel and set the head in the center. I placed the pouch and the list beside it like a treaty. The wagon waited where we left it, wheels turned slightly inward. We started sorting the survivors into a row that made sense. She worked with calm hands and I matched her pace without ego. Each repaired piece felt like a step back onto solid ground. I held screws, fetched tape, and shut up unless asked. When the last seam rested, she opened the music box once. The first notes rose, careful and even, then stopped on purpose. She glanced at me and I felt the old fear loosen. "I don't trust easily," she said, "but I can teach you." I nodded and chose the slow work over any cheap fix. We locked the side gate and checked every latch twice. She placed the token in a drawer that I left alone. The copies went into a folder I couldn't miss. I stacked tools where she pointed and wiped the table clean. Then I waited for her eyes to land and stay. They did, and they softened without losing that hard edge. "We keep them," she said, "but we set rules now. No secrets, no surprise dumps, no hands inside without both of us." I agreed and meant it because I finally understood the cost. She turned off the music box and the room held steady.